All right, welcome to the video. Today I'm going to talk to you about a really horrendous thing that can happen to you if you come from nothing and you eventually think that you're far better, or even worse, you have some hand-me-down beliefs that start to just kind of reveal themselves after you reach a certain amount of revenue, and it substantially holds you back from making far more money. This usually happens with my students, and occasionally, believe it or not, with a client that's making a lot more money than one of my students. But most of the time it'll happen with a student that starts at nothing. They get to, it's usually a key revenue benchmark that they think is significant. For a lot of my students, that's $100K a month. Some of them, it happens around $500,000 a month, like $500K a month. With my clients, it's not as common, to be clear, that it happens with my client base. However, I have seen it happen with my client base, and this can generally happen around $2 million a month with my clients. And it all depends on your level of thinking in terms of what the level is that you're gonna run into this type of issue. So let me just backtrack real quick and introduce this topic to you real fast. So the concept is pretty simple. On a subconscious level, we all have a defined set of characters, okay? Characters are an individual that has an entire set of characteristics associated with it that just kind of reveal themselves, and you start to become and play that character when different circumstances, milestones, or attributes are happening in your life. So as an example, in this particular case, for what I'm going to talk to you about in this video today, the central milestone or accomplishment that you experience in your life is some new level of revenue that you've hit and maybe even maintained for a bit, and then all of a sudden you just swap identities. This is a simple way to break it down. You become a completely different individual in comparison to the type of person that you were, growing to the point that you financially then changed. Okay, so this typically, if done correctly, can be highly beneficial. But in the example I'm going to provide to you for self-awareness purposes, so you can make it beneficial, this example I'm going to initially provide is not beneficial. So I have this student. I'm here in Miami, Florida, in the United States. This particular student was overseas. He's in Europe. I won't say which country, just because he'll likely be able to identify himself, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful towards the guy, but it's a really good set of lessons that I need to share. So this student's in Europe, and he's part of my Inner Circle program. And long story short, we started to work with one another several years ago. It was probably 2019 that he's one of my founding Inner Circle students, I would call him. And to be clear, this particular guy came into the group doing maybe 20-ish K a month. So not that much revenue at all. To be clear, that's not a lot of money in the world that I come from here, and the types of people that I regularly help. But he starts at 20K a month, okay? That's his starting point. Now, per usual, okay, your boy juices that revenue up through teaching him what to do, how to do it, and, encouraging him from an accountability perspective to be consistent with the things that he needs to do on an ongoing basis to consistently grow that revenue. Now, it took him not a tremendous amount of time. I mean, I want to say under a year, maybe like a little more than a year, he gets to 100K a month. Now, once a student hits 100K a month, this is usually a significant milestone for somebody that is coming from nothing. So if you're, a person who doesn't have a trust fund, you don't have your family backing, you're like me as an example, where you just started off working a job, and you likely did whatever your current business is on the side at first, or maybe you took a big risk and saved up some cash and just jump shipped, and you jumped off the cliff and you built the airplane on the way down, and it worked, okay? And you got into business. 100K a month, although it's not a significant amount of money, I mean, it'll change your life for sure. 100K a month can open up a lot of differences in lifestyle for an individual. Most people who get to 100K a month, they'll inflate their lifestyle rather significantly at first, okay? They won't do anything crazy out of the norm anyway for somebody who's making 100K a month, but they'll start going to all the nice restaurants. They'll fly first class everywhere they go. They'll never see economy again. These types of people as well, they might hire a few extra people, and sometimes that could be good, sometimes it could be bad, depending on if they're smart with that decision. They might go out of their way to live somewhere better. They might go from whatever apartment they were in. Typically when you're doing 20K a month, you're in like a 2-bedroom apartment, maybe 3-bedroom apartment somewhere, nothing crazy, in some kind of major city somewhere. And you'll level up. When you get to 100K a month, you might get yourself a penthouse. Once again, depending on the cost of living where you're at, what a penthouse will cost, but you can get yourself something nice, simply put. You might even get a nice car or two. It's not gonna be the best car, but it'll be a nice car for sure. Something above the norm, Keep in mind, After taxes in almost all places where businesses operate, especially in Europe in this case, this person grosses once again 1.2 mil a year, but they might net like 600K of that, maybe 700K if they're lucky. So there's not a tremendous amount of money left over. There's roughly like 50-ish K a month left over in net. So just with those costs alone of like nice restaurants, maybe an occasional sports game, you travel, you're not staying in like the dinky little room in the hotels anymore. You're probably going to a 4 or 5 star resort. Amex bills are probably your biggest expense on a month-to-month basis in terms of what takes money. Your rent's inflated. You got better cars than what you had before, so car payments. To be clear, you got a little extra cost just from lifestyle stuff that you're spending money on. And then of course your business expenses will typically go up between 20 and 100K a month as well. Not that they have to, but you might choose to do so. Now, to be clear, once you get to that point, okay, just notice all those different things are a pretty big shift in lifestyle. Now, as an example of what I'm talking about, where on a subconscious level, you just kind of think things should be a particular way. And to be clear, like this is a perfect example. Like there's a substantial difference in what you likely think somebody who makes 20K a month does with their money versus what somebody with 100K a month does with their money. There's just psychologically in your head right now watching this video, some differences you could reflect on. And vice versa for the dude that's doing, $500,000 a month. When you get to 500K a month, I'm sure that you can also consider that there's some differences in how somebody at that level is making their money, living, doing things, what kind of cars they drive, where they live, what they're spending money on, what they're flying around in, what they're doing in their free time. And that is exactly what I'm talking about. That's like the aha moment I want you to have real quick, is you yourself right now have predefined what you think things should be like at these different levels. And when and if you reach these different levels, you will have a very high probability to start playing that character and doing those things when you reach that level of income. Does that make sense? It's as simple as it is. Now, this can be very beneficial or it can be very detrimental, okay? Because there's different things that happen. Let me explain a few of them. As I mentioned, with the initial examples I provided to you, lifestyle changes, okay? This is one of the number one things that occurs when you typically look at this list. This is what happens first. 2, there is an identity shift, okay? So this is like a change of character, simply put. Quite literally, you as an individual are gonna have a different set of attributes, okay? So if you look at you as a person, there's going to be like a 2.0 version of yourself that starts to pop out. Where if you just take a moment and you list like all the different attributes about yourself that are probable to come out and just kind of happenstantially happen when you reach these different income milestones, you'll have an entire list of things that you just think somebody is like at those levels. I'll give you a good example. Sometimes there's people who are not even close to rich yet. Like they just work a job or something. Not to demean that in any way, shape, or form, okay? It's totally fine to work a job. But I'm trying to be clear in saying like people who just aren't rich yet, they'll have a whole bunch of beliefs about how they think being rich is. And some of them are really bad. Like sometimes they'll think like, to get rich, you gotta be evil. That's some crazy shit I've heard from people who just like, I've had people come at me, and be like, oh dude, you must be a total piece of shit, to have the amount of money you have. And it's like, no, not even close. I mean, almost every rich person I know is one of the kindest, most charitable people that I've ever known. Like I look at a lot of rich people and there's a lot of benefit that they provide to earth in comparison to the opposite. But to be fair, once again, the example I'm trying to provide is that, once again, typically like a regular person looking at rich people who has the wrong type of view on rich people, they'll think a bunch of really, really negative things. And those things are the direct example of what's going to hold them back from making money, right? That's an obvious example. Well, think of it like this too. You might think, okay, well, to go from like 20K a month to 500K a month, well, the guy who's doing 500K a month, like he's got to be a dickhead, or he's got to be like super direct, or he's got to be, or she's got to be like, just working all day long. And like, these are an example of what I'm talking about when it comes to these attributes. Like your brain will fill these things in like one by one by one. Like you will have a defined character, and it comes from all kinds of stuff. Like, it comes to be clear from a few different key areas. Number one, especially nowadays, it comes from social media content. So you got to be really careful with the type of data that you consume and that you allow into your senses, because this will predefine these different characters for you in advance, okay? Social media content, when I said at the beginning of this, I called it hand-me-down beliefs. Hand-me-down beliefs are detrimental, you know? Like, this might be a conversation that you're, like my mom is an example. She's a babysitter growing up. My father, he's a factory worker, worked 12-hour days, like 5-6 days a week. And dude, it's like any kind of idea they could possibly have handed down to me about money is probably bad and not good. You know, like there are a few good ones as an example. Like I remember driving down the highway and my father, he'd point at different houses that were like right up on the highway and he'd be like, "You want to live there?" And I'd be like, "No." And he'd be like, "Why not?" And he's like, he'd make me say it. I'd be like, "No, I mean, it's got to be terrible to live there. It's got to be like loud and just not good." That's a good hand-me-down belief. That's a good one. But there's a lot of negative stuff that's just doesn't make sense when you're trying to get rich that you got to let go of and you got to be very self-aware of that have been handed down to you. Hand-me-down beliefs could be like, you know, you were walking onto an airplane headed back to economy and you overheard somebody in first class say something, and you know, because you look at them like they're obviously potentially a rich person, like that becomes some belief that you inherit, and it might just be like a fragment of a conversation that you overheard somewhere, somehow, from some specific source. Could be a person, could be a conversation, could be a podcast. It's typically something that you don't even have the source data from, okay? It's like somebody had an experience with something and handed it down to you. I'll give you a great example. I had one of my staff members who's a soccer fan, he loves soccer, and he was telling me something, some kind of statistic where he said, yeah, the most common time for a goal to be scored in a soccer game is in the first 2 minutes of the game and the last 2 minutes of the game. And I didn't bother to look that up or not. And I remember I was going to an Argentina game. I wanted to watch Messi here in Miami play on the national team of Argentina. He was playing at the Hard Rock Stadium. And I remember I was telling that to my fiance. My fiance is Argentinian. And long story short, like she's been a soccer fan her whole life. And I say to her, I'm like, man, we got to get to the game faster. She's like, well, you know why? And I'm like, well, I mean, most of the goals like are scored in the first 2 minutes of the game and the last 2 minutes of the game. Like I don't want to miss the first 2 minutes. We might miss a goal. And she looks at me and she's like, what? Where did you hear that from? And I'm like, oh, I remember in this case where I heard it from. I heard it from one of my staff members. And she looks it up and she's like, yeah, it's not even close to true. You know, and that's an example of a hand-me-down belief. Like I went around for whatever amount of time in my life from the time I heard that to that specific moment where I got debunked, thinking that was true, thinking that was real. That's how a lot of people are with beliefs that have tremendous impact on their quality of life, on how rich they'll get, on how much money they'll earn, you know, on like everything that has to do with very important things that are directly impacting their life, okay, and their potential. So sometimes you won't be able to identify where you got it from. Those ones you can immediately dismiss, especially when they're not beneficial to you. So I always try to think, like when I'm actively talking about something that could be an attribute that kind of, you know, I could expect to come out at some random point of money that I'm making, I try to actually like dig into it a little bit and I try to figure out like, all right, is that true? Like, you know, how can I figure it out to be true or not? So some really good ones, and this is also very beneficial to be clear when I use the opposite of that example of the negative stuff. It can be beneficial in the sense that like, dude, you're watching like a Elon Musk YouTube video where he's walking around the Starlink facility or he's walking around his SpaceX facilities, and there's some great videos on YouTube of him. They're like hours long, and it's from an engineering channel, so it's like Elon Musk in a very highly technical conversation going through rocket engineering and science and just breaking down everything he's doing at SpaceX. And it was an incredible video. And there's also like key lessons that he talks about. And one of those lessons that he talked about is on this concept called Parkinson's Law. And Parkinson's Law has been like a core lesson for me ever since I heard that originally. Elon had, when he was developing that massive rocket, I think it's like Falcon 9 or something like that is what they call it. And long story short, when he's developing that rocket, the team that he had hired, there's engineers, rocket scientists, mathematicians, like physicists, like really smart and highly educated people. And he came to them and he articulated the idea of what he wanted to accomplish. He assigned them the tasks to accomplish it, and they start doing the math and just breaking down what it was going to take in terms of a timeline. That's what he wanted out of this conversation. He wanted a timeline of how long they thought it was probable to take. And once again, all these highly sophisticated people came back to him just after doing math, and they articulated to him like, yeah, there's a lot of stuff we got to create that like literally doesn't exist right now. Simply put, we think it's going to take about 10 years. Right away, Elon challenges them. He's like, not a chance. You know, you guys got 6 months. And the rocket scientists, mathematicians, engineers, physicists, they threw a fit. I mean, these people were just like, dude, you're arguing with math. Like, this is like, it's like arguing against gravity. You know, it's just math. We're not making up 10 years, you know, like this is just, once again, what it mathematically is going to take. And he's like, yeah, I don't care at all. You guys got 6 months to not only figure it out, but like to do it and get it done and built. Okay, 6 months. And obviously they threw a fit. They didn't think it was going to be possible. Ends up, it took them about 8 months to accomplish that. Build it, get a prototype ready, and launch it. Okay, he was prepared to cycle through many teams again and again and again. Even if it took him 5 years, he would have been a lot happier than having to take the full 10 years. But the lesson in that specific example was, and this is a great handy-down belief that I acquired, was this concept of Parkinson's law. Everything that you take part in, you put a time constraint on. And when you put a time constraint on it, it forces our brain to reconsider how we're going to go about accomplishing the task to get the result done that we're looking for. And it all starts with a time constraint. That one thing has impacted my life so substantially in many beneficial ways. And many people that I've taught that same lesson to, like you now, you will likely think of many ways in which things have taken you far longer than what they should have because you simply haven't put a time constraint on it and attempted to challenge yourself to think differently. That's an incredible handy-down belief. That's a great example of something highly beneficial, okay? I love those types of handy-down beliefs. But in this case, you know, back to my point, a lot of negative handy-down beliefs can come into your psyche that start to define what things and attributes and characteristics and how things should be and how circumstantially things should be. People do this as well, just with like predefined milestones in life. So sometimes it's like things that you're gonna experience no matter what. Age, a lot of people say like, oh, I pictured my life to be this way by 30. Okay, like as an example, I just turned 30 years old in April. And I'm over here thinking to myself, I'm like, man, I want to be way more ahead than I am right now. But at the same time, you know, I'm doing really well. And I'm very grateful for the things that I've accomplished up to this point through my 20s. You know, I feel the momentum, I'm feeling good. But at the same time, just as like a predefined, okay, I'm 30 years old right now, there's a lot of stuff that comes along with that people think. When I turned 30, my birthday wishes changed completely. Instead of people saying things to me just like, oh, happy birthday. Like I remember being, 15 years old and somebody telling me like, oh, make sure you eat as much as you possibly can, like your metabolism will eventually catch up with you. And it's like, what kind of advice is that? But like, dude, at 30, it's like, I can tell you, that's real advice, like that's, at 30, you can't eat whatever the hell you want, you just can't. I've heard again and again and again as a man, the advice handed down that sometime in your early 30s, your testosterone will just start to naturally decline. I've never actually looked that up. I've never looked up the data and the science behind it that backs the fact that that's accurate and true, but nonetheless, it's a handy-down belief that's associated with age that becomes a predefined characteristic of like what I'm probable to think is gonna happen at that specific age, you see? So like, because that's what I think, there's a probability that at those ages, when I hit those different milestones, my testosterone will just drop. Placebo is a powerful thing, whether it's true or not, it'll happen, okay? So my point is, you hear people say things to you like, oh, congratulations, like make sure you start to stretch more now. It's like, what the fuck? What kind of advice is that, But my point is like people have these different conceptions of and these ideas of like what you're probable to experience at these different milestones, okay? I've heard growing up, I grew up in Ohio, which doesn't have a lot of people that you can be inspired by, to say the least. And a lot of the relationship advice there is just crazy. Like you get a lot of that like happy wife, happy life kind of advice. You hear a lot of really weird stuff about like how relationships should be. And then growing up, being in relationships, it's like, well, I've always experienced very different things than what people have told me they're going to be like. But regardless, my point is I don't accept that things have to be the way that other people tell me they're going to be, but a majority of people do, okay? And a majority of people, once again, have a predefined set of attributes, how things should be, okay? What things are going to be like based on different milestones. Now, if we tie this back to my original example from my inner circle student in Europe, okay? So he goes from 20K a month to 100K a month. He gets the lifestyle changes. He has some identity and character shifts. And unfortunately, there is a lot of stuff I had to work through with this guy relative to this new character that he became. That, dude, there were things that were really holding him back, okay? So for starters, one of the things that he just randomly started doing was taking himself out of the business, okay? He just started removing himself in every way, shape, or form from any kind of day-to-day actions that had to be taken. So he just starts to remove himself from any type of like day-to-day action that had to be taken, okay? This was terrible to see. Okay, it's like I said, back to using Elon Musk as an example. Elon Musk is one of the most highly involved people. If you ever get the opportunity, there's a super thick book by a guy named Walter Isaacson, whose job it is to follow around Elon Musk and literally just write books about how he is. Okay, they are great books. And to be clear, Elon is the most highly involved, like up your ass type business owner you could possibly imagine in your head right now. He is the opposite of like just fuck off mode. And he is one of the richest people on earth. Okay, Mark Zuckerberg, I've been to Facebook's headquarters in Menlo Park many times over. Okay, I typically go on an annual basis. COVID happened, I stopped going for like 3 years. But I started going back again. Almost every single time I've ever gone to that headquarters, Zuckerberg, like all the employees know that Zuckerberg, Sheryl Sanders before she retired recently, like every executive in that business is in there actively working, like running around, like checking on different departments, like doing stuff, doing work, getting the business to move forward. So my point being, it's like the richest people on earth are crushing it. My clients who do like 8 figures plus annually, who are like at the lowest $10 million a year, some of those guys being like $20 to $50 million a year, dude, those people are in the fucking trenches. Like they are doing work. They're some of the most intense people who are tapped in, locked in, like doing things, actively moving the business forward, highly intolerable of anything that holds the business back, doing anything and everything once again to get the business to make more money. Versus this student in Europe that I'm talking about, he hits 100K a month, a measly 1.2 mil a year gross, you know, and he starts thinking that one of the things that has to occur when you hit that level is that you completely take yourself out of the business and that you just don't do anything anymore. Like, where does that come from? You know, like where did he get that? Where did he get that information? What kind of hand-me-down belief did he hear that from? What kind of hearsay? Like, what type of content did he consume? Did he pull it out of a book? Did he, like, who told him that? Okay, and when I ask him that, he's like, I don't really know. So he can't even source the information. He just keeps attributing it to like, oh yeah, it's just successful advice that you have to follow. Like, I've always heard. That's what he says. He's like, oh, I've always heard that. I've always heard that that's what you have to do. Doesn't that make you more money? It's like, dude, no, that doesn't. You are tapped in. You are locked into the business. That's what I've always seen, witnessed firsthand. You know, I've heard that kind of stuff as well, to be fair, where there's people who will tell you like, oh yeah, take yourself out. Like, dude, they're not talking about removing yourself from any kind of activity in the business. They're usually saying like, okay, so if you're actively doing sales pitches every single day, okay, you want to eventually hire somebody to work alongside of you so you can hand that task off so you can then go do something that's even more revenue driven than that. So like when you hire and replace yourself in the business again and again and again, what you are attempting to do is you are attempting to take what you are doing, replicate it into somebody else to get done just as good or pretty damn close to it, freeing your time and effort up so you can go do the next highest level thing that's available to do that generates more revenue than what you were previously doing. That is the actual advice that almost every single one of these people that talk about taking yourself out of that role are actually talking about. But it gets diluted through hearsay and through hand-me-down belief conversations, or just once again content where it's like, oh yeah, take yourself out of the business, like you shouldn't be doing anything in the business. It's like, that's not what works. Okay, that's not what works at all. But to be clear, this particular student who's now at 100K a month, like that's just where he gets capped. So he has, I could list 24 of these types of beliefs that, you know, and these attributes and these like ways of thinking that turn into ways of operating that are just detrimental, you know, that keep them locked in at 100K a month. I mean, no joke. It took a good, like an entire another year and a half, just one by one to like strip these things down away and out of him to get him to start advancing again to the next income milestone. Thankfully, I got him above 100K a month, but it took a while, to be clear, because that plateau, that was one of the thickest ceilings of income I have ever smashed into with a student, consulting client, period. It was thick. It's hard to bust through just because it was made up of so many core beliefs and characteristics that the individual thought were success traits instead. So we had to work through them, remove them, add different ones, you know, and that takes a little bit of time to tweak for sure. So anyway, my point being, you really got to make sure you understand, okay? And you can, when I twist this for you here and, you know, kind of wrap up this video so you can walk away with some great value from this, I want you to understand these can all benefit you, okay? Rather than being detractors that take away from you. You can predefine a set of characteristics and attributes about yourself, about how things should be at different milestones that are far more beneficial, but you got to be proactive about it. This is the key. The very, very, very high probability, like close to 100% probability, have this like unknown character that's just chilling inside of you, waiting to just jump out and be who you become. And it's probably not good, or at least as good as it could be, because it's made up on a subconscious level of hearsay, hand-me-down beliefs, age-related milestones, income-related milestones that come from who knows where. Surely not you, okay? Whereas when you proactively create these different things and you define ahead of time the attributes, characteristics, how things are gonna be when you hit different milestones, you have a far more beneficial character, that you evolve into and become, that you get to leverage to push through those ceilings faster to get to the next levels of income above those. So to be clear, don't learn this lesson the hard way. It's an advanced lesson for sure. However, very important lesson nonetheless. To be clear, you like this kind of stuff, like, subscribe, do me a favor, comment any kind of video requests that you got. I always take a look at your guys' comments. Thank you for engaging and checking out the video. And just to shamelessly plug, if you want the real anabolic steroids of these types of lessons, the real meat and potatoes, the juice, join into my Inner Circle program. It's a group of high-level students, rich people trying to get richer. Usually the lowest ones in there are around $50K a month. We got guys in there doing millions of dollars a month. It's a very diverse group of people that all have the same central goal. There's rich people trying to get way richer than they are right now. There's a lot of marketers, agency owners, e-commerce store owners, personal brands selling info products, just general business owners in there as well. We do masterminds 4 times a year here at my house in Miami. In addition to that, we have a group chat, do weekly calls on Saturdays. We even do some one-on-one calls together where we can work through stuff like what we've talked about here today, in addition to very practical and tactical business lessons. So very excited to help you out on an ongoing basis. Thank you for watching the video, and per usual, excited to help you more. All right, bye.